Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we know other people might still be joining. But as always, this meeting will be recorded and we will send out a YouTube link following the meeting with some notes and then all the slides that are shared. So hopefully for those that either can't stay the whole time or weren't able to attend, they can still get the information that's shared. Aaron won't be able to join us today, so he asked that I just sort of lead the meeting, and we'll go ahead and get started. So if you don't mind keeping yourselves muted as people are presenting, and then if you do have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put those in the chat, and we'll try to answer those as they come in. Can we go to the next slide? Next slide. Okay, so as we sent out, we have a full agenda today. At the end, we'll be talking a lot about the October 1 submission, which is coming up, and things related to updating exit codes and high school completion status codes related to the special ed event dropouts and cohort graduation data, which are due by October. But we'll start with other announcements and agenda items first. So we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Megan Lopez. She works at USBE, and we'll turn the time over to her.
All right, thank you. For some of you, this is your second time meeting with me today, and for some of you, this also might be your third or fourth time hearing some of this information. But please, if you have any questions as I go through this information, please go ahead and raise your hand so we can get those questions answered, or go ahead and put your questions in the chat. On the next slide, is our contact information. I and Anne Michelle Neal oversee our WIDA assessments for the state of Utah. Please don't ever hesitate to contact us if you have questions about these assessments. So let's get into some changes. First, I just want to go over some screening reminders. If this is new for you, we use 2 WIDA assessments during the year. We use the screener, and that is year long. Most of the time, students are screened towards the beginning of the year. And then the other assessment we use is the Access, and that is the annual English language proficiency test for growth and proficiency. And that always happens in the winter in the months of January and February. So these are just some screener reminders because screeners are happening for most LEAs right now. Please do know that in the next couple slides, I'll go over the ESSA amendment, our consolidated state plan amendments in further detail, but screening students, again, available all year long, but mainly happens at the beginning of the year. Students get screened for English language services based on the 3 home language survey questions. All the home language survey questions were updated with our ESSA amendment, and there are 5 questions that were updated, but students are only screened for English language services based on the first 3 language questions regarding the student's primary home language. If any of those 3 language questions are answered with anything other than English, then that would trigger the need to screen a student. One question I have gotten a lot from LEAs recently is the qualifying criteria. That did not change in our ESSA amendment. So the qualifying criteria is that same overall 5.0 composite score. So a student that gets a 5.0 or higher is considered proficient, and that student would not be marked as EL. A student that gets a composite of a 4.9 or lower does qualify for language services, and that student would be marked as EL. The USBE, we cannot make these changes or mark these in your SIS, so it's very important that you, the LEAs, make these changes as students are being screened and coming into your LEAs in your SIS. So again, also we ask that you please keep the screener score report in the student's cumulative file, whether that's a paper file or a digital file. Please keep a copy of that screener score. Another question that I've been getting a lot is the grade level cluster to be assessing students on. There is a screenshot below to show the correct grade level clusters for screening. And that is also in the test administration manual on page 13. Screenings take place mainly at the beginning of the school year. LEAs have the first 30 calendar days from the first day of school to screen for EL identification. After that initial beginning of the year 30 days, it drops down to 10 school days. So again, please, please, please make sure that you are updating your SIS since we do not have the capability to update them. We don't know what your home language surveys are saying, which students need to be screened. You are responsible for screening those students and updating your SIS. Again, if you have any questions about the screening process, please let us know. Okay, we can go ahead and move on. Also, some important dates to be aware of. We just released this. These are our access testing dates. This is the annual access test to assess a student's proficiency and growth in academic English. These are the dates that we have established for this year. And so, one big change that has taken place this year is that we are going to do 2 pre-ID uploads. So, the first pre-ID upload will take place in early November. So, we ask that you make sure that your SIS is as up to date as possible. By early November, Maureen Rushing will also be announcing the exact date as we get closer when she will do this poll. We import all student information into WIDA AMS for you, and we order all materials for you as well based on this first pre-ID upload. To also help with data, we have decided, Cliff and his team have decided to do another pre-ID upload right before testing starts. So we know that a lot of enrollment changes in November and December, and you have a lot more students that come in, are identified. And so the week before we start testing, we will do a second upload to make sure you have the most current data for students in WIDA AMS. So again, as students enroll, make sure that you're getting them marked in your SIS appropriately. We will not be doing any materials ordering based on this second pre-ID upload for you all, as you will be receiving test materials probably that same week that we do this. You can order additional materials in the additional windows materials ordering window that starts on Wednesday, January 3rd. And that window stays open almost the entire time for the test. So this should also help with the data validation that LEAs need to do. So you can see there's a pre-reporting data validation. This is what the LEAs need to do after testing. There's a 2-week window to get that done. We're hoping that by doing this second pre-ID file, that should lessen the load of that data validation that you'll be doing. All right, next. All right, so there's a lot on this screen, but I'll let you guys go through and read this in your own time as you got copies of these slides, hopefully. But let's get into our ESSA amendment and the implications for you LEAs. So one change in our entrance procedure, while the criteria did not change, our old amendment allowed for students, if they came to Utah, were identified, left Utah for 2 years or less, if the student came back within 2 years to Utah, they did not have to be rescreened. That has now changed. And what the change is that students that leave and come back within the same school year, those students do not have to be screened. But if a student leaves Utah schools and comes back in a different academic year, even the next following academic year, the student would have to be rescreened for services since we do not know what that student's language services, monitoring, or anything was like. So that is one change. Please make sure that this is communicated with those that registrars, counselors, any staff completing screenings. So in the past, if a student was gone for 2 years or less, they didn't have to be rescreened, but now it's if they leave and come back in just different academic years. The only way is if they leave and come back within the same academic year, they don't need to be rescreened for services. All right, next. All right. As I talked about earlier, again, I'm not going to read everything on this slide, but the home language survey questions were updated. Once I am done, I will put links to the home language survey in the chat, and I will also put a link for where you can actually find the entire ESSA amendment as well. But you can see the 5 language question or the 5 home language survey questions that were updated, and then the 3 that are highlighted, those are the ones that screenings are based on. One of the biggest reasons why we made this change to the home language survey questions is because we had a lot of misidentified students. So these questions are the questions that have been approved by the Department of Justice and the Office of Civil Rights. And we believe they're a little, they provide more clarity, and the purpose is a little more straightforward for being able to identify a student's primary language, not a student that's dabbled in another language, is trying to pick up another language to become multilingual, but we really want to target we want target questions that let us know what the student's primary home language is. So um, if you have a registration system that is online, you need to make sure that that system is updated with these updated questions. And also, please do make sure that it is available in languages that parents request. We are working on getting the top languages spoken in Utah, getting the HLS translated into those languages. But the process for procuring that is a little lengthier, so we don't have those available right now. We hope to have them available relatively soon. But in the meantime, it really is the LEA's responsibility to translate these for parents and guardians that request. So make sure that that is updated. And also, please just make sure that just because a student is identified as an EL, that doesn't take away any equitable opportunities to participate in all classes, because we have been seeing some students that are marked as EL being put into specific classes without the opportunity to be in maybe advanced classes. And I see a question in the chat. Do we use these questions word for word as you have them on the slide, or are minor modifications allowed? They do need to be word for word. All right. And again, I will put the link to the actual form in the SIS. Another question just about entrance and HLS that I've been getting is consent for screening. The home language survey and the language that's used on it, it is consent, parental and guardian person consent for the student to be screened. Okay, go ahead to the next, please.
Megan, there was one more question on that last slide.
Okay. Oh, all 5 questions or the highlighted 3. So all 5 questions, good question. Thank you. All 5 questions do have to be on the home language survey, but the 3 that were highlighted are the only 3 that can determine if a student is going to be screened. The refugee question is for other data that the state needs to collect and other programs that that student might be entitled to. And then the question for what is the preferred LEA to home communication, that also has to be asked and adhered to by the LEA, but that does not determine screening. Let's see if any is that referenced in the survey for the parent. I'm assuming the question is that referenced in the survey for the parent, meaning the consent for screening. Yes, when I link that, you'll be able to see on that form. And I also suggest that if you do online registration, that you have the verbiage that we have in the form on there, because parents do need to know that the student will be screened based on the answers. All right. I don't see any other questions. All right, so exit. This is the big one. So our exit criteria did change. Okay. It used to be the overall composite score of a 5.0 in order for a student to exit. That has changed. The new updated exit criteria is an overall composite score of a 4.2 and a speaking score of 3.5. So both have to be met in order for the student to exit. So the student has to get an overall 4.2 or higher, and the student has to have a speaking score of 3.5 or higher in order to be considered for exiting. Now, this year was a little unique. At the end of last spring, the rule, because our amendment had not been approved still, we were not anticipating that to happen. We thought the approval would come much sooner, but of course it took forever. The rule at the time when we received our access scores in late April, early May, the rule was still the overall 5.0 because that was the law at the time. Students that met that overall 5.0 criteria had to be exited. Then, come August, our amendment was approved. And so, what that meant is that our most recent scores were still those scores that we received in the spring of April and May. So, since those are the most current scores, students that met the new criteria, still based on the 2023 Access spring scores, those students now also had to be exited. This is going to be a unique year in which, just based on the 23 spring access scores, students can be exited based on both criteria. It's not going to be a combination of both, it's one or the other, but your LEA doesn't get to decide which one they want to go with. You do have to use both. So if a student met the overall 5.0, they have to be exited. If a student met the new updated one of the 4.2 overall with the 3.5 speaking, they also have to be exited So you're going to apply one or the other to the student to exit them just based on the 23 spring access scores. Moving forward after this year, once we get into testing for access this January of 24, it will only be the new criteria being applied. We have to apply both because we only have the most recent access scores based on 23. Please let me know if there's any confusion. Um, Also, please do note one thing, and this has always been in our consolidated state ESSA plan. When a student is exited, you do have to send home an official exit letter. In your SIS, you will mark that they are now fluent or proficient, whatever your SIS says. They are no longer an EL, but the student will have to be in monitoring for 4 years. Okay, so these things that's always been in place. So the student is no longer EL. You will need to update your SIS. They will be monitored for 4 years. Um, and the biggest thing that LEAs have been missing, and again, this was always part of the plan, is that they do need to hold a parent teacher student conference within 30 days of that student exiting as well. So you can discuss them exiting and what monitoring will look like per your LEA and kind of the plan to ensure that the student is still making academic growth. So the conference is what's been missed. Now, because this change, the amendment changed right at the beginning of the year when things are a little nuts. We are just allowing for right now at the beginning of the year, if those conferences are established within 30 days, meaning like we've communicated and we're making plans to meet within the 30 days, but we just might have calendared it a little further out with the fall conferences. We'll allow that to happen because we know things are moving very quickly and things are a little hectic at the beginning of the year. But for the future, when a student does exit, those conferences do need to be scheduled and held within 30 calendar days. I'm going to see if there are any questions or hands. All right, we can move on. All right. Another thing to be aware of is that when a student is in monitoring status for those 4 years, if you're monitoring, you're collecting data, and all the data and the observation and everything during those 4 years of monitoring suggests that there is actually still an academic English language barrier, then this LEA can rescreen the student. You need to do this you need to make sure that you are communicating with the parents. Um, and again, it can't just be, hey, we're going to just put the student back into services, remark them EL. You have to start the process over with screening. Okay. But per Title III law, you can't restrict a student from being rescreened and being re-entered into EL status. But again, it can't just be based on assumptions. You do need to be collecting data during that monitoring, and that the data really needs to be pointing towards evidence of an academic language barrier still persisting and keeping the student from meeting their academic growth and gains. So again, if need be, the student would have to start the whole process over and be screened to qualify. All right. Um, so that definitely needs to be communicated to those who are monitoring. And then I think we can move to the next slide, which might be the end. Again, contact information. Our phone numbers are there, but we're quite often in trainings and in meetings, so it's harder to answer our phones, but email we can get to a little quicker. So please let us know what questions you have, but I am more than happy at this time to take questions. I do want to give updates on the Aspire SIS. We have been working very closely with Paula and her team that run the Aspire SIS. So if your LEA uses Aspire, we are getting those changes made. They don't happen overnight, but if you can make any updates, please make those updates. I do believe that, and Paula might be able to come off of mute and speak more to this, but if you use a different SIS, I believe technically they get up to 18 months to make those changes, but I would highly recommend and encourage you all to light a little fire to get that to happen faster, because this is all very much directly tied to a student's civil rights and making sure that they are identified correctly, especially because for us, having those students identified correctly in your SIS is how we pull them for testing and also identify them. Paula, did you want to say anything about updating Aspire and anything else related to SIS?
Yes, yes, we have applied that update on Aspire, and so our users are aware that it is now available, the 4.2.
Yay! Okay, yay. That is wonderful news. So the being able to mark now the new exit is updated in Aspire. So that is wonderful news. That is fantastic. So you should see that change. All right. Questions about how anything data-wise, that how this affects data, SIS, anything that we can answer. I do believe also the new assessment technical manual is available. If I can figure out how to link that, since I am stuck on a Chromebook because my computer died. I will definitely try to get that put in the chat as well, so you can see the new growth tables and how that's calculated as well. I might have overwhelmed or uh, did a really good job of explaining things. And I hope that's the case and people weren't just totally lost and didn't know what to ask. But please email me if you do have questions. Can I see those 5 questions again? Yep. I'm going to actually start putting things in the chat for you all.
Well, thank you, Megan. And we will go on to the next. Oh, it looks like there's one more question actually. How long has the refugee question been required?
The refugee question has actually been on the home language survey for as long as I can remember. That's the one question that really didn't change. So I'm going to put here in the chat is the link to the ESSA plan. You will need to filter down to Utah and 2023.
And we will be sharing out all these slides as well for everybody.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next item. Thank you, Megan, for being here and sharing all that. And if
Thank
anyone else
you.
has further questions, they can either email Megan directly, or if you email myself, we can get the question to the right person.
Absolutely. I'll be on for a little bit if you have more questions.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so I have the next couple items, they're announcements. So this first one is about the district of residence field, which is not a new field, but we are aware of some changes that will be happening in future submissions, so not for this October. So currently, this is what is in the UTREC specifications and will stay the same for our October 1 school year 23 UTREC submission. Right now, the district of residence field is optional for districts, but required for charter schools. The valid values does have to be a district number. It's a 2-digit numeric code. And this is the regular district number of the district in which the permanent address of the student is located. There are further notes on that in the specs that talk about the importance of getting that accurate for charter schools. And as you know, there are warnings associated invalidations on this field, which we do mark on the courtesy data review in October, and we will be talking about later in this meeting. And we ask charters to make sure and clear those for October 1. So what is changing is that come this next December, school year 23 and year end in school year 23, we're taking off the optional part for districts and making it required for everybody, all LEAs. That being said, we can go to the next slide, please. That being said, for December and year end of this year, there will not be fatal errors because we realize that this is a very quick turnaround, especially for some districts that are on SIS systems that don't currently submit that. So again, for the upcoming school year, sorry, and I've been saying school year 23. I am just not out of the mindset yet of last school year. School year 24, I apologize. For this October submission, nothing changes, and charters should continue to clear their warnings and errors on district of residence. And again, level 2 district of residence warnings, as well as the valid address warnings, can be cleared by contacting Sam Uri at USBE. So that doesn't change. But come this December and year end, school year 24, all LEAs, so that includes districts, should submit, if they are able to in their SIS, that district of residence field. But the validations will only be warnings. Now, next October, school year 25, we will turn those validations to level 2 fatal errors for everybody, districts and charters alike. Okay, and then here are the validation references. This is a current thing that we're still talking about and trying to work through. So we also need to look at the valid address validation, and that could possibly also be affected. And we plan to talk about this in the next LEA data meeting in more depth from a technical standpoint, but this is just meant to serve as an announcement that this is coming. So validation S1.368 is the must be present. Currently, it has a filter on if it's a charter, and that will be removed come December. And then the exception on that, which still will be true even for districts, is if the student has resident status A out of state. The next validation, S1.369, is if it's present, it must be one of the regular districts. So that is still the same. It has to be a numeric code 0, 1 through 40 or 42. And then the level 2 warning, this is what validates that district of residence field with the actual address that's submitted. So the part that will be removed on that is that it's only for charters. It will be for everyone. And that's what will next year, school year 25, become a fatal error. So again, this is meant to be an announcement, and we will give more information as these changes are made. For this October, nothing changes though. So any questions on this right now? Okay. Feel free to contact myself if you do think of anything. But for now, we can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to give this announcement. Kristen Campbell couldn't attend today. So this is related to teacher data, and these are just some reminders. So assignments and LEA license requests are due by October 15th of this year to guarantee ESA funding. LEA requests after that will be processed if time allows. So the deadline is October 15th. Number 2, educators renewing an LEAS license must fill out a renewal form and have points verified by a licensed administrator. And there is a link provided there to do that. And then the last one is if the LEA is requesting a renewal of the LEAS license, it must be marked in cactus that the LEA has verified the points under the LEA request form. And the LEA must change the new to renewed. And that's highlighted there. It's the status that shows up on that screen. So that needs to change to renewed instead of new. So those are just some quick announcements. Please let Kristen know if you do have any questions on that. Is any of this new or just reminders? I believe it's just reminders of already existing things that have been happening, but I do not know that for sure. I can verify that with Kristen Campbell, unless anyone else on this call knows. But she did, when she gave me this information, she did say they were reminders, which implied to me that they're things that were already happening. Okay. And I will go ahead and turn the time over to Win for some announcements about incident data. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Callista. You have the next slide, please. So I think I just have about 4 slides for you here. The first is just a reminder that for the retaliation field, please use yes or no. And the next slide, please. I'll show you the reported retaliations that were submitted last year. I believe that was the first time that these data were submitted. You can see a breakdown there. This table 7 is from the annual. In the past, it's been called an incident and discipline data report. It's going to be called a law enforcement action report going forward. But you'll see this table 7 in there. It has the incident types by the retaliations for the 3 roles of offender, and victim, Next slide, please. Right, I thought it might be interesting just to have a quick look at the data that you submitted for the new law enforcement fields in the previous school year. So you can see the incident counts and the student counts for each of those 4 fields for search and seizure, criminal citation, and non-criminal citations and physical arrests. Those are statewide totals. Next field, please. Next slide, thanks. So just a quick reminder, I know we've talked about this at least once, but bullying is going to be split into ultimately 3 fields to add cyberbullying and hazing. So currently you're reporting cyberbullying and hazing along with bullying as one thing. We're going to need to update that this year, and bullying will be broken out into 3 separate infraction types: bullying, cyberbullying, and hazing. So I know that work is scheduled to be done, and we'll have more information for you about that as the year goes forward. Thanks, Callista. That's it for me.
All right. We next have Melissa, who will be talking about some recent updates to the UTREC specifications for this school year.
Thank you, Callista. Seems like I'm lighting up green, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. All right, so I just have 2 quick slides here. So I'm currently the editor of the UTREC specification manual, which many of you are likely familiar with. It's really just the large document that goes through every single data element that we collect via UTRECs, and it tells you all about it. So we do update that usually several times a year. So we do it with the new school year, and that has been completed for this school year. So it did come out a little bit ago. So if you visit this page frequently, you might have already have noticed that it was updated. I believe it's been out since end of August. So that's been updated. So you can still find it on the same web page where it has always lived. Once you get these slides, the title of this slide is a link to that page. So if you need a link to that, that will be provided. I'll probably put it in the chat as well once I'm done talking. So yeah, just letting everybody know that that's been updated for this school year. It likely will be updated again sometime during this school year because it does have updates quite frequently. But it will be a couple months before we update it again because it was just recently updated. And then I have one more slide related to this as well. So this isn't necessarily a new thing, but it's something that was made more explicit within the document. There's now a section kind of talking about the use of red text in the document. So we've always used red text, at least in my time at the agency, to denote newer things in the document. And there's just been some questions coming up around the use of the red text and what it means. So all it really means is this is something recently added. I have gone through in this last update and changed some of this red text to black text for some of these things that have been read for over a year or well over 2 years that aren't so new anymore. So hopefully the red text is now more accurate. But also there's been some questions around, well, I see things that are red and they're new, but I don't think they're actually like functionally ready yet. So there's some confusion coming up there. So I would say just be mindful and check the recent revision section of the document, which is right at the beginning. It will go through every revision and it will tell you what month that revision was made. And I'm highlighting here with these arrows that some of these say upcoming. So some things are things that will be implemented in the near future functionally, but they're not functionally ready yet. But we want you guys to know that they're coming. We want to show you what they look like functionally when they are in place. So just upcoming means it is going to happen within this school year, as denoted in those notes right there. But it might not be quite ready yet. So maybe functionally in the system, you might not see it happening yet, but we want you guys to know that it's going to happen because we know how, you know, a lot of times these changes do take some kind of work or effort, whether that's coding in your SIS or some other kind of effort. So we're trying to make you guys aware of this as soon as we can. But I also realize it might be kind of confusing to see, well, this is supposed to be a change. Like I don't see it in the system yet. If you don't see it yet, you should see it soon. But obviously, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. I might not be able to answer questions directly, but I'm happy to connect you with somebody who could. So that was just my spiel about the UTREC specifications. And yeah, that's all for me. So we can move on to the next person.
All right, thanks, Melissa. So we'll turn the time over to Cliff from the UTREX team to talk about some LEA feedback that he is hoping to get. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the first 2 slides I'm going to show are things which I've shown in the previous meetings where I brought up asking for this feedback initially, but I want to retouch on them just to make sure everybody's familiar with what it was that I was talking about. And if you haven't gone out and done the survey yet, to kind of go back through what we're asking for to where you can still have the opportunity to go out and provide us some more information. So this is about our data collection. What is the data collection for? USB collection data is used for supporting the following assessments, such as RISE and ACT, student programs such as the Child Nutrition Program and special education for school, district, and state funding. Whenever we have fatal errors, and just to kind of note here on that, there's been some discussion about terminology for fatal, whether or not we should try to soften that to something like non-loading. I'd also be open to getting your feedback on that. I don't have that on the survey yet, but that would be something that would definitely be something we're internally talking about and trying to be sensitive on. We have had that same terminology for many, many years. So even if we do start to make a switch, there'll certainly still be a lot of documentation that still has the term fatal. But whenever we have those non-loading fatal errors, it affects one or more of these different things which we're asking for here for assessments, for student programs, and for funding purposes. And sadly, the biggest impact on them not loading is typically on our students and not getting our best efforts. Go to the next slide. So what we're asking for is for you to take part in the solution. And right now that's just through a survey by giving us information, helping us understand where you're coming from on all these different areas where you can see that we've done things well. As those questions down below are indicating, and those are the same questions on the survey, that we want to know what's working, what's been working for you regarding the collections for your LEA, what hasn't worked for your LEA or has caused complications, what changes and actions by LEAs or schools could be considered to give our students the best experience. And looks like I've got a cut and paste problem here on this, where this was then what actions and changes by our USBE by the state could be considered to give our students best experience. So we're kind of separating that out to try to help understand both your side and opportunities and our side and opportunities to make sure that we're working in a symbiosis to get the students the best that we can. The first question that we asked, what has worked or been helpful for your LEA? I'm going to give representational for what people submitted as it would be a very long meeting if I went through each and every one verbatim. But the feedback that we got was for communication, and that's regarding emails, meetings, quick responses to tickets and questions, that was definitely helpful for all of you. And then the ability to have what Utrecht does with the daily error validation reports, to where you have feedback every day as far as the data that you're working with daily for your SIS and your students. If there's any complications, any inabilities to get them loaded, and also making sure that we have good documentation for you to where you can have resources for how that should happen. And that's what we've got for what's been helpful. The next end we've got is what hasn't worked for your LEA. So to start off, one of the things which was specified was wanting detection and notification of failures from multiple records when only one is appropriate. Some of you districts have experienced this problem, and it's quite interruptive and prevents pretty much the whole collection from going through with one or a small number of instances. That is something that we heard and already had plans for trying to get a fix in place for. That is still in progress. I won't give up-to-date notes on each one as we go through, but I just wanted to at least touch base on that one and let you know that that is in progress. We've got need detailed error descriptions for every error. So as we go through our clearinghouse specification, not everything has a detailed description on it. And the request that we had delved into getting better details for everything. So top down, looking at it and seeing if there's an opportunity to communicate it better, that we provide better details. The data gateway uptime and resolving data gateway errors, making sure that that application is always there for you, and making sure that the pages which you're wanting to use on that application are always up. Want to do the rollover sooner than August 1st. So that one's a process that we are working on, trying to slowly creep that a little bit forward, but I can say there's maybe not a good roadmap for any large jumps, as we do a lot of work in between our school years. But we hear you on that and also have that goal, moving it forward. Assessment vendors not getting student rosters. That's tied to getting everything loaded into Utrex and then directly after that over to them. And that's caused a lot of complications. Having an exact list of which warnings turned to failures and when. I think we saw an instance of that and trying to get that communicated. And hopefully that's helpful for working with this complication that's been happening. And we'll continue to try to do that to get those changes to you and notified to you before they happen and as early as we can. Students not loaded or rostered due to errors of non-related student fields. So this one was new, and that's great. That's kind of what the survey is about, is trying to find opportunities. And I personally feel this is one which is an opportunity that we don't hear a whole lot about, but that we are talking about internally what could be done towards this. Communication of changes to collect validations. So again, that's just back to our communication, and what these meetings are trying to do is try to keep those communications as best as we can for you and let you know when there's changes to those validations. And I think it also comes up in a later survey piece of opportunities that we have to try to get you more involved in when those validations are going out and making sure that's communicated or even tested. All right, go ahead to next. What changes and actions by LEAs or schools could be considered to give our students the best experience? So this was coming back from the LEA perspective, what you all felt would be something that you could do that would be helpful to make sure the students got a better process. So these would mostly be, again, internal processes, but sometimes it can reach out to also connecting with other places. The first one is that all the SISs to be able to share what fields align to the collection field sent. And I'm assuming that that would mean that it's available for not just the LEAs to know what fields they have on their screens for their SISs, but also for the state to be able to also work with communication and a little bit more pass through to be able to say, oh, you're on PowerSchool. On PowerSchool, I believe that shows on this page. That's what we have listed. The ability to communicate on that level would be something that this could offer, but definitely sounds like it would be something that would need to be negotiated out by LEAs with their SISs. Expanding Aspire improvements, letting funds focus on classes, teachers, and students. It's great to hear love for Aspire. Isn't necessarily a good Utrex part, but it is a great sales pitch there for Aspire. So that's appreciated, that's acknowledged, that Aspire being free can help schools with some funding to have another focus. I believe that was the intent of that. Sending data before school, before start of school year and resolving issues then. This comes back to what I had mentioned before of looking for some opportunities. And this would also be something that we'd have to have engagement with LEAs on to start doing testing before the school year starts. Or I should say before this LEA's school starts, their opening day, to try to get testing involved prior to that, and us looking for opportunities how we can make that testing window available earlier for you, and we're even potentially looking at the possibility of being able to do that before the rollover date. So there's some good opportunities for this feedback and trying to find ways to collaborate with you all on your want to be able to start testing earlier. Focus more on correcting errors so that the students are able to be loaded. So that's, again, talking about an internal focus on LEAs getting their errors resolved and getting the students loaded. Sharing understandable and usable data. Again, with this on the LEA level, I believe that's kind of open to saying that the LEAs will need to share that understandable and usable data, probably going down to the teachers to be able to benefit the students. Making sure that if there's information that you have on a district level that would be helpful, that works its way down. And when we get to the USB side, we'll kind of step into some of those areas that you guys have for feedback or actions that you think that we can take. Go to the next slide. Okay, so what changes and actions by USB could be considered to give our students the best experience? Test more changes with LEAs before releasing them. So trying to work with and arrange with certain LEAs or provide the opportunity for LEAs that want to take part in testing of, say, manifest changes, which is another term for what we do with the clearinghouse specification. So being able to see when any of these things change and to be able to potentially test with them early before they're released. Define a smaller set of minimum fields required to allow loading for rostering, or shift some errors to just be warnings until mid-September. So I believe the aim with this was saying that there's a lot of students which are getting errors which are not directly related to, say, an assessment or a roster. And by limiting how many fields that we're looking at either during that time frame for before mid-September, or looking at another opportunity of just loading partial data is what I'm understanding from this, that getting students in that could roster because they have enough fields to be able to roster into the system, and not letting a field which isn't necessarily related to rostering, but potentially end of year funding, there may be an opportunity there to not be as restrictive for the entire school year. And that's something which is, again, good feedback and something that we can consider how that could be done. Collect and send LEA data before schools start so that testing with assessment vendors also begins before school starts. So this ties back into a lot of the theme here for this, and that's getting things done sooner than later. And that also includes us getting that data from each of you LEAs sooner, and to be able to start testing first with you, and also extending that testing out to our vendors all before opening day, for your students to be able to have a better experience on their first day of school, instead of that's potentially when we start to get your data and then we start troubleshooting on that same day too. So there's good opportunity there. Improve higher education connection for transcript data. I know we've had some transcript issues and getting things out shared over to the higher education and getting those issues cleaned up. I believe that's what this is intending for, to where that data flows through sooner for things like concurrent enrollments and other things which higher education is involved in early on, such as with the assessments and rostering, but of course also throughout the whole year. Again, if there's any of these that I've misinterpreted from any of you who have done these surveys and you want to add anything onto it or add further details, by all means, we'd love to hear more from you and to hear from those of you who haven't given us any information yet. Then we have be more transparent with business rules and code used for validation. So I think that this is playing into that our audience that are resolving the codes are typically quite technical, and that there's been a request on some parts anyway for us to be more transparent, to be able to share literally like a code snippet of this is what we're doing for this validation, to where it's completely understood and you can, on your side, build that out for your SIS. So if I've misinterpreted that again, by all means, correct me and let me know, but I do think that that would be for certain audiences, and some, it wouldn't necessarily be required, but just something that's offered and helpful. Finalizing and rollover available as early as possible. The end of year finalizing, we did have some hopes this last year to try to bring that out a couple weeks earlier and make it available, not required, but to where people could start finalizing earlier. We did have a system complication that slowed us down on that, but that is something that we're aligned on, is wanting to help people get their end of year finalizing started as soon as possible. And as far as with the rollover, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier. Right now, our process is between around the 7th of July when the finalizer window closes and when the new school year rolls over. Typically takes us a couple weeks at least, and that's generally for the whole of July. And we have a target to try to always hit by August 1st. But we do have the same alignment on that to try to look forward doing that earlier whenever possible. I think this last year we beat it by half of a day. That was all. I think that we had it for half of a day earlier on the end of July. But our goal is also to bring that out for you sooner and to get our processing efficient and not have any issues in doing that, to where we can provide that for you as soon as possible. And then last, we have the improved reliability of all related applications. We kind of talked about another spot earlier with the data gateway being a complication. I feel this is pretty much related to things like that, or any potential Utrex problems, to just make sure that we're doing our best jobs of understanding downtime and risk and taking any effects which we can to keep everyone up and having all of our applications available for you to use for these critical times, especially start of school year. Go to the next slide. So what I have for our next steps on this is starting off with continuing the collection survey feedback. I'd love to get more feedback from you all, find out if there's other great ideas waiting for us to be able to look into and find ways to investigate, research, which kind of steps into what we're going to be doing, is having some internal meetings to discuss possible solutions for the feedback that we've been given and what will have the best return on investments for efforts. So some great ideas would take a very long time to accomplish, and we want to make sure that we're getting you as much benefit as we can as soon as we can. Longer investments of time, those can kind of still get planned out, but we'll have to kind of look at that in our determinations with each solution. And I will plan to present again at the next monthly meeting to be able to share what we have from our internal meetings, any potentials, the ability to discuss and hear feedback on what we believe we've heard, and making sure that we've heard it correctly and are coming up with a solution that fits what the request was really about. Then we have establishing external meetings to try to get any opportunities that you have with as an LEA and helping our students to be able to help you focus on what's in your realm and any opportunities that we can help lift or provide feedback or solutions for. Again, as a symbiotic pattern with this, that we both have opportunities of growth and improvement. And we want to make sure that you know that we are also invested in helping you with your opportunities and not just looking at what's just on our side of the plate. So that's going to be also on the LEAs to agree to work and set up with me on getting some initial meetings to talk about any of those opportunities. Those who'd like to help pursue them. I'd be very happy to start working with you all for what those would be. And then we will also try to present any progress for that at the next monthly meeting as well too. And the next slide is just moving on to the next person. I just wanted to open it up to any initial feedback or thoughts from what I've just gone over. Feel free to throw it out into the chat, or as was mentioned, raise your hand and give people a moment to be heard. Okay, question on the update on the student suspensions days fields. I don't have anything to be able to share with you directly right now, but I can get back to you after the call and let you know specifically with that. Unless anyone else here from USB has any updates that they feel they would be able to share, but I don't think I have anything initially for you at the moment. Any other questions or feedback, suggestions? How soon will the slides be available? Okay, that's back to you, Calista.
We can try to get the slides available in the next, well, tomorrow's Friday. I can't promise by tomorrow, but by Monday would be pretty realistic.
Right, so I can go ahead and hand this back over to Calista and David for the next section. Feel free to ask further questions in the chat or target me directly and ask me any questions. The survey link was on that last slide, and I'll also go ahead and copy that out and put it out into the chat to where people aren't having to wait to provide any survey feedback.
Hey,
Thank
Cliff,
you.
and just for your own notes, I believe what Michael is asking about is at year end, the Power School SIS, we found that the absences due to suspension field was coming in incorrectly at the student level. And so I believe that's what the question is asking for an update on.
Okay. thank you for clarifying that. I'll get back to you with what that detail is. I don't have it handy to be able to give you any initial feedback though.
Hey, thanks, Cliff.
Thank you.
All right, so next item now we're kind of going into the next three presentations are related to the upcoming October 1 UTREX finalized submission. This first topic is specific to cohort graduation rate data, but the reason that this is very important right now is because all updates that need to be made for cohort 23 need to be finalized in your October submission. So anything after that October 10th deadline, the grad rate is considered final. So this is really important to get this done now because basically after October, the cohort 23 data is considered final for graduation. All right, next slide. We sort of have two parts of this presentation, and David will be talking first. The first part will be going over pretty in-depth everything related to the grad rate calculation, the different codes, outcomes, things. We usually do this training once a year, and then the second part will be going over how to make updates via S1X record update and historical update requests, and I'll be going over that part. So I'll turn the time over to David to talk about the first part.
Okay, hi everybody. Just to let you know, the preliminary graduation rate was run for the 2023 cohort, and we sent out through Move It into the Accountability Surf folder two files. One is the student level data that shows what their completion status and outcome would be, and the second one is what the graduation rate would be if it were run today. Also, the graduation rate preview report on the data gateway has been updated with the 2023 cohort. So if you go to the data gateway and you log in and go to your tools, you should be able to go in and select the file to download. Next slide. This is talking about the UZI report. This is important for adult education students who have transferred to adult ed. You can find the link on the gateway to look at the graduation for these students. This will show who has passed the GED or has received a diploma through adult education. You can also look at the graduation for the 4 years report on the gateway, which is available and shows multiple years of cohorts. The Tableau dashboard that will be updated after the finalized data. So I guess that's a little bit late at that point to use the dashboard to make any changes, but that's just an update on that report as well. Next slide. One is the UZI report, excuse me. It's a 15-month report, shows any students between those ages that graduated from adult ed through, with a high school diploma or a GED. So the GC code is used for students who graduate with a diploma, and the GG code for graduates who passed the GED. It's available after the July and October 1 submissions. If they passed the GED since the time the report was generated, they'll show up on the report. They'll be released coming in on October 1st. If they claim to have passed before the GED, before then, it would need to be verified through the GED's website. The next slide. So this is just showing you where you can go to look at the report. giving you an idea what the report's about and how to use it. If you need any help with the report, contact the data gateway at your data gateway admin or the Utrecht's help. Or you can contact for using the report, contact Adam Little here at USB. Next slide. So all the graduation data for 2023 must be updated if there's any updates that need to be made in Utrecht by the October 1st submission deadline. This year it's October 10th. Please review all of the graduation data that was put in Move It and the graduation preview report. Can we go back a slide? Yes, we can go back a slide. Okay. Any changes to the finalized 23 data by year end must be made via an S1X record update or through an historical update request. If the student's currently enrolled, that's how you would update it through a historical update. Now, these updates for the historical update requests are due 2 weeks prior to the October 1 submission. So that would be in just 5 days from now. Next slide. So the final graduation rate for the 23 will be cohort will be run after the submission deadline and everything's finalized on our end. Then it'll be run by IT and all the reports will be updated at that point. The final public release of graduation after everybody's had a chance to review their data will be in December. If you're looking at the graduation rate preview report on the data gateway, here's an example of what you'll find. It shows student level data along with counts of graduates, dropouts, other completers, and continuing students, and shows how many students would be excluded from your graduation report for each school. Next slide. Okay, so what are we looking for on these reports? If you use the student level high school completion status report that we sent out to check their exit codes and high school completion status that were finalized at year end for this last school year. Every student in your file will be counted to your LEA. So if there appears to be a student that you weren't expecting, you'll want to investigate that student further. You can contact Callista or myself as well to help figure out why that's the case. If you find something, you need to not only make changes in your own SIS, but also needs to be done in Utrecht's. So updates will need to be submitted. Next slide. Use the aggregated report that we sent out, and also the counts on the preview report to check for who's going to be who's going to be a dropout, who's going to be a graduate, etc. The graduation rate outcome data is directly determined by the codes that were finalized in UTREX, and that will, for this upcoming submission. And the okay, next slide. The graduation rate is calculated based off the data entered in your SIS and sent to UTREX. Each student who attends your high school is assigned a cohort. The cohort is set starting with the 9th grade record, and that's the cohort is then calculated based on when we expect them to have graduated from that school year. The school's graduation rate is the number of graduates divided by the number of students in the cohort minus those that are excluded. The next slide. So this goes back to what I was referencing before. So a student who is in the 23 cohort, if they entered the 9th grade in school year 2019, they're expected to graduate within 4 years. The cohort is set by the state based on the data that was submitted in UTREX and can be checked in the student lookup function on the data gateway. They won't be assigned a cohort until after the data has been submitted and we run the cohort graduation rate code. So students starting school in 9th grade have a cohort calculated based on how many years until they're expected to graduate. So if they entered in 10th grade, it'd be 3 years, 11th, 2, and 12th, 1 year. Next slide. Each student can only be included in one graduation rate. So there are several tiebreakers that are used to determine what school should receive credit for the student. The end result is that one enrollment record for each student is chosen and counted in the final graduation rate. Any records that were set as school of record equal to no are not used to make determinations of where they of graduation. So be aware of that. The cohort won't be triggered for students with dual enrollments in a given year if they're both in 8th grade and 9th grade. The script looks at would take their 8th grade and would the cohort would not be triggered at that point. Next slide. So here's just a few examples. I'm not going to go over every example, but you can reference back to these when the slides are sent out. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. This slide has an important link that everybody should download this reference. This shows how different codes and exit codes will affect the graduation rate. And then this just shows how that's calculated. Again, it's the graduates divided by the total in the cohort minus the excluded students that you can find on your report. Next slide. Checking cohort dropout rates. The dropout rate is determined by the number of dropouts divided by all of those. These will not, the graduation rate and the dropout rate will not equal up to 100%. So just be aware of that. Now the next one is about event dropouts. Cohort dropouts are not the same thing as a single year dropout. Anybody so how many students who entered during the school year or dropped out? And this rate is calculated by USBE. The special ed event dropout report shows single year dropouts for special ed students. And you can update prior exit codes and UTREX for event dropouts in the same way you would cohort dropouts. So how do we make updates to prior data in Utrex? Updates from your SIS to Utrex can only be made to the current year data. After the year end finalized submission in July, Utrex rolls over to the new year. Update the graduation data for the students in the 23 cohort. They're no longer enrolled in your LEA. You'll need to submit an S1X record update. For data that cannot be updated with an S1X, then you'll need to submit an update through the historical update request on the data gateway. So I see there's a question in the chat. When can we expect historical updates to be complete?
I can answer that, David. So we will be talking about this a little later when we talk about the October 1 submission training, but the answer to that is that historical updates are extremely a manual work that requires multiple teams. So data and statistics, we have to review every request one by one, whether it's approved or denied. And then from there, we do some work and get it ready, groomed for IT. And then the Utrex team writes insert statements to manually change each of those updates individually. And then it goes to the ops team. So just sharing all that because it's a very time-consuming process. So from the point that the updates get approved, we guarantee it'll be done in time for you to finalize. There is no date, though, that we tell you, before the 10th that it'll be done by. The status on the request, when it's set to approved, that doesn't mean that it's been completed. So you'll be notified in your email when that status goes from approved to completed. Right now, we've been approving requests since year end basically, and the first round just got completed. And so there's at least 3 more rounds that will still need to go from approved to completed. So I can't give you a specific date other than it will be done prior to October 10th. And you can look for those request statuses to change from approved to completed. We'll also talk about later what that means for LEAs who are waiting on historical updates and whether they can finalize or not. And so hopefully that answers your question, and we will be talking a little bit more about that a little bit farther in the training.
So here's a list of codes that turn to dropouts if they don't get updated by in the submission, October 1 submission. So these are ones that you'll definitely want to check. So a couple of these are like the AE. You can use the UZ report to update those. The next slide. These are some other codes that will also turn to a dropout, expelled. If it's left blank, it'll be coded to be unknown and then withdrawn. If a student is reported as RA, but they don't return the following school year after they've been reassigned a new cohort, they would be part of that the dropout for that graduate cohort year. Okay, and then these are ones that may turn into a dropout, just for your reference. Next slide. And then here's a list of excluded codes. Okay, turn over the time over to Calista.
Thank you, David. So there was a question in the chat about historical updates, and there are situations where one LEA gets a fatal error, but it's due to a record from another LEA that has to put in the historical update request. So I don't know of a way in the system that, you know, the other LEA would be able to see that the update has been put in. So I I put in the chat, the best way is if you have a student in that situation, or your LEA is in that situation where you're getting a fatal error due to another LEA's record that needs to be updated, to just reach out to us directly. We can quickly tell you if an update request has been put in and what the status is on it, or we'll tell you that it hasn't been put in, and that you would probably want to reach out to that other LEA to do that. Okay, so now just I know this is review probably for a lot of people, but there's also always new people in these positions that come to these meetings, and we get lots of questions about S1X record updates and historical update requests. So it's just a good review for those who already know, and then also for those that still have questions and confusion about this. So David has gone over the point that when there's prior year records that need to be updated, these are the two ways that you would do those updates. So now I'm going to talk specifically, how do you do the updates? So next slide, please. So again, the whole reason that we have to do updates in these two ways is because UTREX can only receive data in the current year. And so when we're talking about graduation for the 2023 cohort, it's based off of the year-end data from 2023. And so because UTREX now we're in 2024, you can't just make those changes to 2023 in your SIS. Otherwise, that will not get updated in UTREX. So that's the whole purpose of why we have to do it this way. And so once we hit that rollover to update anything in a prior year, it has to be done with an S1X update or historical update. Okay, next slide. So sometimes, like we said, a big reason past year data needs to be updated is for graduation purposes, but there's also other reasons that you might need to update old records, and those might include grade level inconsistencies or permanent exit errors, and then obviously exit codes and high school completion status codes. Other examples also might be student name or gender changes. We see an occasional request on cohort year. So there's other reasons besides graduation that you might need to update old data, even though we focus a lot on graduation. All right, next slide. So again, there's two ways to do this once you are no longer in the year that you're submitting in for UTREX. You need to update a different year. So the S1X record updates and the historical update requests. Okay, next slide. So S1X record updates, the reason that they're called that is because it's an S1 record, which you're used to submitting in the current year. And then it has that X on it because the X is what notifies UTREX that it's an update record. So all it is it's a current year S1 record with that X put in the resident status. And that's what notifies UTREX that it is updating a field from a prior year. So again, you can use those to update prior year exit codes and high school completion status codes, which is what we're focusing right now. If you wouldn't mind just going back really quick to that last slide. So the example here is that, let's say you had a student who was exited last year. On this example, the record ended in January 2023. And they were exited with the transfer code. So you thought they were transferring to another LEA. So come August, you got your report and you realized, oh, they didn't actually enroll anywhere, and you found out that they actually went to homeschool. So the reason that you'd want to update that is because, as David talked about, TS is a code that will turn to a dropout. And if you found out that they actually went to homeschool, the TH code is excluded. And so that would be an update that you would want to do, because that would help your graduation rate data. And so the only way to fix that code, you can't just go in your SIS and make the TS a TH. You have to submit a record in this school year, 2024, and you would put the dates for the current school year. So next slide. Okay, thank you. So this screenshot, it's actually incorrect where it shows the exit date is August 15th. So sorry about that. But the point is that the record is submitted in 2024, and you would put the TH code, and then UTREX knows, oh, this is updating the TS code to TH. And so then that will be in UTREX correctly. The way you would put the entry and exit dates on the S1X, you would just enter them. The 8/15 is probably meant to be the entry date, just the beginning of the 2024 school year, and then you would exit them immediately, 1 to 2 days. So these types of records should be submitted with the resident status marked as X. That's really important. If you don't put that X, then UTREX will not know that this is an update record, and it will defeat the whole purpose of what you're trying to do. It cannot be used for students who are currently enrolled with you. And so again, this is only for students that exited and are not currently enrolled with you. And then this also is only for S1 records. It should not be submitted with any other type of records, SCRAM, YIC, any other records, just the S1. All right, next slide. So again, first check for yourself if you're trying to decide, should I do this S1X or should I do a historical update? Is the student currently enrolled with your LEA? If they're not, then you can do the S1X. You'd create the current year enrollment record, put the X on the resident status. It might look a little different from SIS to SIS. You would exit the student after 1 to 2 days. So we have gotten questions on this because LEAs tried to put the exit date from when the student graduated, but that's in the prior school year. So the entry and exit date need to be in the current school year. Set the membership to 0, and then enter the updated exit code and completion status code, or whatever you're trying to change. That part's also really important, because if you do all those other steps and then you leave the exit code blank or the completion status code blank, then it's actually going to update that prior year code to blank, which is a dropout. So you really wouldn't, unless you're trying to get rid of the code, you want to make sure and put the new code in. There are some cases where you want to make it blank, but just make sure that you're aware, if you don't want to make it blank, that you put in the new code. All right, next slide. This is an example just in one SIS of what it looks like. I believe this is Aspire, and it's showing on that resident status field what it looks like if you're trying to do an S1X. So it shows the X and then it's called an ES change record. Again, that might vary in different SIS systems. Okay, next slide. Okay, before I talk about historical updates, are there any questions out there on S1X record updates? And you can also email me or put them in the chat, but just want to see if anyone has any current questions. All right, well, let me know if you think of anything. So the other method of doing updates is historical update requests. Again, this is only for things that cannot be done with an S1X. So for graduation, this is often students that are currently still enrolled with you. Other examples of reasons that you might do a historical update: prior year exit in high school, completion status, corrections, or I already said this one, for students that are currently enrolled, incorrect grade level submitted in a prior year, level 2 fatal error exception requests for students whose prior grade level is correct, but is more than 2 grades lower or higher than the current grade level. Corrections to cohort years, those are pretty rare, but this is the only way to change the cohort year. And then legal name and sex changes, and that has to have been changed on the birth certificate for us to change it. All right, next slide. So the way to do these, it is through a form on the data gateway. You have to log in. You also have to make sure that you have the role to be able to put these requests in, otherwise you will not see the option. So it's typically the LEA admin, and it's under the UTREX dropdown. There's the historical update link from the UTREX dropdown. Next slide. So if you don't see that, then it probably means you don't have that role. Once you select that link, it'll take you to the historical update request page. You'll want to select new request. Go ahead, go to the next slide. And then you'll just want to fill out as much information as possible. Again, these are manual, so the more information you can give us, the better. Where multiple LEAs are involved, it's also great if you can provide that information. And also, I just want to point out when it asks for like the school and district information and school year, we're asking for the information on the record that needs to be updated, not the student's current enrollment. So we'll look it up anyways and change it if it's not entered correctly, but we are asking when you fill this out for the enrollment that needs to be updated. So another important point on that is that the LEA whose record it is should be submitting this. So to Logan's point, like if you have a fatal error, but it's because of an enrollment from a different LEA, then that other LEA should really be putting in the request. If they're not, we can try and work with both LEAs, or we at least need to know that you talked to the other LEA, they're aware, or that they're aware that this request needs to be done. Please, though, just put in one request per student. If both LEAs are putting in a request on the same student, that's just a little more work for us. So if you have any questions on that type of situation, please reach out to us first and we can check if a request has already been put in or not. Next slide. Also, I'll point out that last box where it says state notes will often communicate to the LEA when we have questions about the request, or if it was declined, we try to explain why it was declined. I know that sometimes people aren't able to respond to that directly in the request itself. So if you see that we're trying to ask a question about it or it needs information, please reach out to us by email if you can't do it on the form itself. That way we can get it resolved quickly. We want to approve them in a quick way, so we don't want to leave them hanging for weeks. And sometimes we do need information. All right, so again, the deadline for these this year is next Tuesday by 5 p.m. So you have 5 more days. That, though, is for a guaranteed completion, meaning if the request is put in by next Tuesday at 5, we guarantee it will be done before October 10th. You can continue putting in requests after next Tuesday, and we will still do the work and review them and approve or decline them. We just can't guarantee that IT will get those done in time. We'll do our best. So if this is something that you really need done for graduation or event dropout data or to clear a fatal error, we really encourage you to get those in by Tuesday. And I think we talked about all the rest of the notes on here. And just for future reference, the deadline on these is always 2 weeks prior to any major deadline. And it can be adjusted depending on when the finalized deadline is, that submission. So this year it's October 10th because of holiday and weekend dates. And so this deadline was adjusted to be 2 weeks prior to the 10th. All right, next slide. So this is what I was talking about when Michael earlier asked when you can expect historical updates to be completed. So again, if they're put in by the deadline, which is next Tuesday, we guarantee they will be done by the 10th. However, we realize that that can be stressful if you're trying to finalize before the last day. So here's hopefully some guidance that can help you figure out, like, do I need to wait on this before I finalize if you're in those last few days? Updates that are needed to clear a fatal error must be completed before finalizing. And that's so that the record can get in UTREX and be included in your finalized submission. So you have a couple choices. You can wait until you see that that goes through and gets done and then finalize, or you can finalize, and then once you see that the historical update you were waiting on is completed and your fatal error went away, then you can refinalize. But if you have historical update requests in that are not causing fatal errors, so updates that are impacting your graduation data or your event dropout report data, those need to be completed before those rates are calculated, but they don't impact your current year submission data, so you wouldn't need to wait on those to finalize. So again, it's your preference, but we guarantee if they were approved, they'll be done by the 10th. But if it's kind of worrying you or stressing you out and they're not done and you want to finalize before the 10th and it's not causing a level 1 fatal error that's blocking a record, you can finalize. And because these are manual requests, it's okay for you to finalize before those historical updates are done. And then once they are done, it will those will get run correctly in the grad rate and special ed event dropout rate. And again, if you have specific students that you're waiting on, you can always reach out to us, but this is if it gets down to the last few days and you're wondering, do I need to wait to finalize or not? All right, next slide. And as always, you can contact myself or David if you have any questions related to codes or the graduation rate calculation or updating prior year data. All right. Angie asked, do you want us to pause submission once we finalize or keep them going? So we'll talk about this in this training, but in October and December, you do not need to pause your submissions. So you can just keep them going. All right, next slide. So now we will go over the important items for the October 1 UTREX submission. Okay, so some announcements that are specific to this school year. Please make sure that your SIS is correctly submitting the absences due to suspension field. We talked about this earlier. We are aware there's a couple SIS issues, or there were at year end. So we talked about the Power School issue with the data not being correct at the student level. And then we were also aware that Aspire was submitting zeros and not actual values. So apart from those SIS issues, we just ask that you review and make sure that you are submitting that data when possible. And Paula just verified Aspire is now submitting the values and not just zeros. Okay, after the rollover at the end of July, this is just an announcement. We did notice as we were doing some different steps after the finalization that 12 LEAs had no data for school year 23 in the UTREX Live database. It's okay if you don't know what that means. This is something internal on our end when we talk about the UTREX Live database. So the finalized data is still there. But what happens is that if LEAs roll over too soon, that it wipes the prior year data from that one spot, from that one database. So it's not that your data is gone, it's just that one spot, it is gone, and it affects the data gateway, and it affects your ability to do S1X record updates. I believe that it is very close to being fixed. There's nothing that those 12 LEAs need to do. It's something that IT has to fix. And Cliff can chime in if he wants, but I know that they've been working on this issue and that it should be pretty close to fixed. Again, this only affects, you wouldn't see the student records if you looked in the student lookup function on Data Gateway, or if you're trying to submit S1X record updates. But other than that, the data is still there, so not to alarm anyone. All right, if you have any questions on that, you can reach out to me and we will let you know the status on that issue. All right, next slide. Okay, I will actually turn the time over to Riley to start talking about the deadlines.
Hi, everyone. So moving into the upcoming data submission period. So the October 1st deadline for school year 2023 to 2024 is on Tuesday, October 10th by 5 p.m. So normally the deadline's on the 7th, but if the 7th falls on a weekend or a holiday, in this case, it's falling on both a weekend and the following Monday is a holiday, it's the following day. So please have your calendars marked, ensure that someone is there and able to finalize and is there up through this deadline, because sometimes we might find issues with data that you've finalized, and if you just like walk away from your work and just, I don't know, jet off to some vacation, we won't be able to contact you. And so just, yeah, please have someone available who can finalize data through 5 p.m. on Tuesday, October 10th. So the goal is for the finalizer to be turned on starting Monday, October 2nd, and it will be turned off on 5 p.m. on Tuesday, October 10th. You are able to finalize before October 1st if the finalize button ends up being available early, only if you don't have any changes in enrollment between the day that you finalize and October 1. Otherwise, you're going to need to refinalize. So this submission is for data that are as of October 1st. And it doesn't matter what day of the week October 1st falls on. If it's on a weekend, if it's on a weekday, it doesn't matter. It's the entry and exit dates that determine if the student makes it into the October 1 count. And that little blurb on the bottom explains more about the deadline and some other details. Next slide, thank you. So after the October 1 data are finalized, you do not need to delete your submissions after the October 1 finalization has been done. So Calista kind of touched on, well, pausing them, but yeah. So future submissions will not override your finalized data unless you finalize them again. So just allow your submissions to continue collecting, but know that if you finalize, that will overwrite any previously finalized data. And then after you finalize your data, please download all October 1 UTREX reports from the data gateway immediately after you finalize. The link to finalize reports in the finalize box on the UTREX overview directs you to the archive reports, and those are for the current UTREX submission are not available immediately. And there's no guarantee that the archive reports function is going to be available when you need them, for instance, during an audit. So it's really important that you download all the reports for October 1 from Data Gateway immediately after you finalize. They get updated with each submission. So if you wait a few days and you're still sending in your regular collections as should be submitted, those reports might not actually reflect what data were finalized. So after you press finalize, download reports. Next slide, please. And then some of the courtesy data review points that we'll be highlighting, focusing on in the courtesy reviews that will be starting soon are district of residence and valid address errors, SSID warnings, total enrollment counts, counts of foreign exchange students, economically disadvantaged or free and reduced lunch indicators, English learner counts, cohort graduation rate data, cohort reassignment for students on a path to an alternate diploma, and special education event dropout data. And in terms of clearing fatal errors, please review all errors and warnings and clear what's possible. It's especially important to pay attention to fatal errors that block student enrollment records from getting into UTREX, including level 1 fatal errors on the student record, the student list, and the school and district record, if it's blocking all the data for the school or district data from getting into UTREX. And then the level 1 fatal errors on course records will have to be fixed if they result in the S1.377 error that reads, if the student has more than 10 days total membership of S1, S2, and S3 in the school, the student must have at least 1 AM or course record with membership greater than 0, unless the grade level is pre-K or resident status is D or out of state. So it's really important that these fatal errors get cleared because these ones block student enrollment records, and those affect your data quality and also funding counts. And then also all level 2 fatal errors need to be included, need to be cleared, including permanent exit errors, student grade level inconsistency, dual scram, and dual kindergarten errors. And with the dual kindergarten, just work with the other LEA and the student's parents to determine which LEA keeps that record and which will unenroll. And in order to clear the fatal error, the overlap in the both of the records needs to be less than 20 days. And then some of the level 2 warnings that must be fixed for October 1, and this again is for charter schools, so valid address warning and district of residence warning. So you can contact Sam at USBE to get help with clearing these warnings. And then also all SSID warnings, please review those and review them very carefully so that problems can be avoided related to students either having more than one SSID or students sharing an SSID. And if you find duplicate SSID issues, put in a SSID merge request as soon as possible so it can be completed prior to the week finalizing. And you can do that on the USB help desk, and you choose the service request and then select SSID merge request. And similar to the historical updates, this requires a lot of manual work. And so they're not necessarily really quick to merge or to resolve. And so the sooner you can get in these requests, the better, so that our IT team can take care of it. Next slide. And then in terms of October 1 total enrollment counts, the requirements for students included in the October 1 enrollment count are that the student has to be in grades kindergarten through 12. They have to have at least 1 day of membership. They have to be a Utah resident, which is resident status B, C, or U. They have to have an active enrollment record as of October 1st, and school of record is not known. These counts are important because they determine funding for your LEA. And you might have some questions of why aren't my counts aligning with what the state's counts are saying for my LEA, but those filters that were in red describe who is counted and who is not counted. So if you're ever wondering what's going on, maybe the students in preschool, or maybe school of record is no, and that's not allowing the student to be counted. And then also for school counts, please make sure that school counts are correct for this school year. And you can check that new schools are included in your LEA school summary report, which is on Data Gateway. And it's better to catch that and fix it now rather than at year end. And you can email us at datastatisticshelp@schools.utah.gov, or you can put in a help desk ticket if you find any missing schools in the school summary report. And this is important because the reports are used for auditing and for funding purposes. All right, back to Calista.
Okay, I'm gonna try and go quickly. So again, these slides will be sent out. So other things that we will look at and include on your courtesy data review if we find something are related to the other demographic counts. So specifically, we will look at English learner data and the economically disadvantaged data, or your low income data. Both of these are specifically important in October for funding purposes, so they do need to be correct. We will flag anything that is a big change from last year, or if you have 0 and you had a count last year. Okay, next slide. We also look in October at the foreign exchange student counts. We check the allocations that were given by the state for each LEA with what's actually being reported in UTREX, and that's the J resident status code. The reason we check this is it's important for WPU funding for foreign exchange students. So we will flag if your LEA is reporting 0 or a count that's different than the allocation that we're expecting. And if you want more information on the foreign exchange program, there's a link provided there. Next slide. So Malia will be talking more about this later, but on the courtesy data review, we do also look at special ed event dropout data. Hopefully you've already been reviewing it, but we will flag any big changes with this year compared to last year. And the reason that we look at this is because these students will be reported to OSEP as special ed dropouts for indicator 2. And there is a specific report in UTREX October reports where you can review that data. Next slide. This item is something that we've added in recent years. So the is 1% counts is something that needs to be accurate. Well, it needs to be accurate all year round, but it's something that we used to only look at in December, but we started looking at it in October to make sure that it is accurate in December. So just giving LEAs extra time to fix anything if we do find there are problems with this data in October. So what we'll flag is if you have no students reported as is 1% when you did have a count at year end. We'll also look for big changes, even if there is a count, comparing year end to what's reported in U-Checks right now. And again, this is in preparation for the December 1 submission when this is a critical data point for special ed funding. Next slide. We also look at cohort graduation data, which we've talked about pretty in depth. So please just make sure to review or have the people that should be reviewing the graduation rates data. If that's not the U-Trex person in your LEA, please make sure that that data gets reviewed and updated, because if it's not updated by October, it's final. So any updates need to be made in this finalized submission. And we talked about the deadlines and how to make updates. So let us know if you have further questions on that. Next slide. Related to the cohort graduation, we will specifically in the courtesy data review, look at students that were given the RA code. And the reason for that is because if they didn't re-enroll this year, they will be counted as a dropout in their reassigned cohort year. So we will flag students that were given RA in school year 22, but that didn't have the RA code again or GA at year end in school year 23. So we will flag that on the data review for you to review. Well, the reason again is that we're running the 2023 cohort data. So this is important to get it updated now if there is something to update. For students that were given the RA code in 2023, they will be reassigned to cohort 2024. It's important to get this right because retained or the RT code will have a different graduation outcome than RA. So RT counts as other completer, where RA, there's the opportunity to count as a graduate. So RA will actually reassign the cohort year and give the student the opportunity to get the GA code. Requirements to use the RA code: the student is 1% and must be on path to receive the alternate diploma. Okay, next slide. A couple other non-respond items. Charter students reported as resident status C or B. We check this because the C code should only be used by a student's district of residence. The B code should not be used for students in charters. So we will flag that if charters are reporting students with that code incorrectly. We'll also flag for district and charters alike any students with resident status as A and F. It's not that that's incorrect, but we flag it because those two codes are not given funding in MSP funding calculations. So if these resident statuses are incorrect, you would lose money. And so that's the reason we flag it, just for you to check. All right, next slide. Other non-respond items, meaning it's at the bottom of the letter, but still important to review. For LEAs with graduation rate and event dropout rate data, we just want you to check that you're actually submitting S1X records correctly. And so we will flag how many S1X records you're currently submitting. And if it's 0 and you expect that you should be submitting something and not 0, then it would alert you that maybe you're not doing it right. And make sure to keep submitting those S1X records up until you have finalized. And just make sure that those do get in your finalized submission. All right, next slide. All right, and I will turn the time over to Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. So, as you may know, courtesy review letter contains comments and suggestions that data and stats team usually provide to LEA before the data finalization deadline based on UTRAC's data collection. We usually compare this year data to last year to see if there are unexpected discrepancies. We will draw your attention to verify them. Here are some examples that you may see from October courtesy review letter. First of all is the district of residence warning. Please contact Sam to see if this can be fixed. The other two examples we're putting here is for are for J1 foreign exchange students and special ed event students. So basically we're gonna point it out how many students reported, compared to the last year, let you verify the data and to see if you can fix it before finalization. Next slide, please. So to verify the data accuracy, there are some files or reports that you may find helpful. First of all is the examine file, which will help you to check if data is getting into UTRACs. You may find it on the UTRACs overview screen under the level 1 fatal error and the warnings. This is an Excel file with multiple tabs with which you can check student level records. For example, you can filter on the records to check what data is making it to the UTRACs from your SIS. Also, if you want to see if an X1X record update is getting into the UTRACs, you can go to the student tab and filter on residence status by X and look for the student current year record with the updated codes. Next slide, please. Please download all October reports for your LEA on Data Gateway, especially right after you finalize the data collection. There are two purposes for downloading these reports. One is user reports to review your data and make sure it's accurate. It's easier to store student level data in the Excel file. PDF shows aggregates by schools. The second purpose is after finalizing, use reports for official purpose and audits. And also this can be for your information for the data you finalized, because if you download the October 1 reports, because it will take time for us to put those reports to the archived reports. It won't be available immediately when you need them. Next slide, please. Here is a screenshot for where to find the download October reports. So basically you go to the Data Gateway website and then under the UTRACs and the drop down menu, you can click the reports and then you can get there to download reports. Next, please. Here is the list of October reports that you may want to download, including all the reports under October reports and student summary reports on the year-round reports. Next slide, please. So courtesy data review for October 1st. Data and Stats will send a courtesy data review to every LEA, whether or not you request it. We will start doing the review on Friday, September 22nd, and through the following week. So basically, we're going to start doing that from tomorrow. You can also request additional reviews up until the submission deadline at schools.utah.gov. The purpose of the courtesy data review letter is to help LEA improve data accuracy, receive correct funding, and to ensure a one-time submission finalization. Next, please. So some tips for final submission. don't wait until the last day and minute to finalize. You will find there are like a traffic jam and it will slow down the process for you to finalize. And if you find there is something wrong with it, you won't have like turnaround time to fix it. And the second one is make sure to review your data thoroughly. We're here to assist the LEAs in reviewing their data, but you shouldn't rely solely on us to review your data. The third is please refer to items noted in the courtesy data review letter. Finalize when you are ready. You don't need our permission to finalize. You can refinalize after you submit a new submission as many times as necessary up until the deadline. And also make sure your data collection has completed before selecting the finalize data button. And make sure you got a completed status with no error before leaving your computer. So again, please download all October 1 reports for your records and for future audits. Next, please. Waiting on some updates to finalize. So updates that are needed to clear a fatal error must be completed before finalizing so that the student record can be included in your finalized submission. For the updates that are not causing fatal errors, for example, the updates that impact your graduation or event dropout rate need to be completed before rates are calculated, but this don't impact your current year submission data, so you don't need to wait to finalize. Approved updates will be completed by October 10. But if you are waiting on a historical update that doesn't affect the fatal errors and you want to finalize between October 1 to 9, that is fine. Next, please. Okay, some resources that you may find useful if you need technical help with the data submission or U-Tracks, please put in a ticket through this website. And also, if you need help with an issue in your SIS, please call your SIS help desk. And then if you have questions about your data or courtesy data review, please email data and stats at the data and stats help email or contact someone on your on our team. Next, please. Okay, I'll give it over to Malia. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so this will hopefully be review for most of you, but there's always new people, so we'll go ahead and go through it anyway. Okay, so the special ed event dropouts. So those are the students that they were enrolled in special ed at some point during the year in 2023, and for some reason they've been identified as having dropped out at the end of 2023. In the report, under October report, special ed event dropout summary for SPED is the name of the report. There is a column called dropout type, and that column tells you why the student's being identified as a dropout. High school completion status code is a dropout type, the exit code is a dropout type, or students fall into this other category that we call summer dropout. And knowing what type of dropout type the student has will help you figure out how to troubleshoot whether there's updates that can be made and the student actually shouldn't be counting as a dropout. Next slide, please. Okay, so if the dropout type is because of the high school completion status code or the exit code, then that means that the last enrollment that the student had in 2023 has either a high school completion status code or an exit code that's a dropout type. So for these students, they can come back to school in 2024 and it doesn't change the fact that they were a dropout in 2023. So fantastic, they came back to school, but knowing that they were at one point a dropout in 2023 is important information to have, because it's a pretty big flag that that they could eventually drop out and be a cohort dropout as well. So you want to keep a close eye on these students. And another important point to know, so in identifying graduates and dropouts and whatnot, we do follow an order of operations. So if the student has a high school completion status code, that's what we use. We ignore what's in the exit code column if they have a high school completion status code. If the high school completion status code is blank, that's when we look at the exit code column. And then if the high school completion status code and the exit code are both blank, then that's when we run into students being identified as summer dropouts. If we'll go to the next slide. So these are students that, because of the way they exited in their last enrollment record in 2023, which includes having blanks on both their exit code and their completion status code, we expect them to return to school. And if the student doesn't have another enrollment record, then they get identified as a summer dropout. And a lot of times with these students, it could just be an issue with their current year data. So these ones you want to follow up and find out if there's a fatal error on the current year record, that would make it seem like they didn't return to school, even though they did. Or if they went to a different SS or a different LEA and that LEA used a different SSID, then that would make it to where UTREX can't figure out that the student returned to school. It's a different ID. So UTREX doesn't recognize it as the same person. And then they also have to have membership greater than 0 for it to be considered as that they're enrolled. And then the rule for summer dropouts is that they have to return to school by October 1. So if they have an entry date on October 2nd, then unfortunately they're going to count as a summer dropout. Next slide, please. Okay, so this data is important to spend time making sure it's completely accurate because it's high stakes for your special ed department. So this data is used for calculating the Office of Special Education Programs Indicator 2, which is the rate of students exiting special education by dropping out. And it's a component of your LEA's Special Education Results Driven Accountability Score, the RDA risk score. And updating codes and tracking down the summer dropouts helps improve data accuracy. It helps ensure that no child is allowed to slip through the cracks due to enrollment tracking issues or outdated data. And then this webinar here has more information if you want to take the time to watch that. Okay, so the steps for the identifying event dropouts. So in early September, USBE Special Ed Data Analyst, me, looks at the event dropout reports and flags LEAs that either have a large increase in the dropout count or rate, or if it's an LEA without a grade 12, if you have even one dropout, your indicator 2 rate is going to be 100%. And so those LEAs really want to follow through on making sure that the data is accurate. So the LEAs that we flag are going to get contacted. Their special ed director will have been contacted by the USBE transition specialist, Lavinia Gerbentrog. And this all happened a while ago. These first couple steps happened in the end of August. And then in late September, the courtesy data reviews that we just went over are about to start. The courtesy data reviews will also flag event dropout numbers again, although that's more just looking for big increases. And then it includes information in the review letter if you're still flagged. Okay, so now the steps for the LEA to take. First of all, make sure your current year data is making into UTREX and make sure it has membership. Second, make sure that your students' exit codes and high school completion status codes from the prior year are accurate. If not, then either do the S1X record update or the historical update request process. If the student's attending another LEA, make sure that that LEA is using the same SSID, and then make sure that the submission it has membership, has entry date before October 1. These are things that could be a reason for the student showing up as a dropout. And then here's another resource. We have a more in-depth training event dropout report for special ed that I can email to you. It goes into a lot more detail than this training that I'm currently doing. So feel free to email me if you want to copy that. Next slide. Okay, and so these are just some frequently asked questions. I know we're about a minute to when this meeting's supposed to end. So I think I will let you go through these next 3 slides of frequently asked questions on your own. And then email me if you have any questions. Okay, and then I want to bring your attention to this document, the graduation guidelines for students with disabilities. And this goes into some good detail about how the different graduation codes are used for calculating indicator 1 and 2, including recommendations on what codes to use in different situations. It's a really good document to check out. Okay, and then I always like to share this slide. So the time that gets spent every year digging into that dropout report and updating data, it makes a huge difference. The last thing we want is for an LEA's dropout rate to be high because of bad data. If it reflects accurate data, then that's one thing. But if it's due to bad data, that's a real bummer. And so it's worth spending the time to try to track down those students and find out updated information about what they did, and get that updated into UTREX. And I should say bad or outdated data. It's not necessarily all bad. So this shows you, so when we start these data reviews every year we start in early September, but this reflects kind of my check in mid-September every year, how we're doing. And then what the actual count of dropouts ends up being after our October deadline every year. And you can see that we go down by 37% was the lowest amount that we dropped by, up to 50% that we dropped by in the count of students that were identified as dropouts. So it makes a really huge difference. So thanks for your efforts on that and keep up the great work. I think that's the last slide.
All right, well, thank you, Malia, and thank you everyone who presented. There was a lot of information today. Are there any questions from those that are still online with us? We will be emailing out all of the slides. You can also email us questions if you think of them, and we will send out the recording. I know there's been a request to get the slides sooner than later, so we will probably email those out in the next day or so, or by Monday. The recording, though, takes longer, so you may not get that immediately when we send the slides out. If there's no other questions, you are free to go, and good luck with everything going into the October 1 submission. Please let us know if we can help you or if you have questions. And thank you.